Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Rich. And as you can see, I'm joined today by my good friend, training partner, Andrew Kieth from GunJitsu Podcast. I'm going to let you introduce yourself here in just a second, Andrew. But as always, let me get set up here. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I don't have the backdrop like our buddy TC, a library full of leather-bound books that smells of rich mahogany.
He is a learned scholar, Mr. TC.
He is. He's a gentleman and a scholar, TC Fuller.
Yes, he is. Okay, brother, looks like we're up and running. We got 10 folks that have joined us so far. People are popping on. As you're coming on, please like and share. We got a good show for you this morning. Joined by my dear friend, training partner extraordinaire, Mr. Andrew Kieth. Good morning, Andrew.
What's going on, Pappy?
It's going to be a good show today. Hey, before we get into the show, I just want to say real quick, thanks for tuning in to Coffee with Rich, whether you're watching live or the replay later. We're just glad to have you. I want to also thank our sponsor, the American Warrior Society. The American Warrior Society, one of the unique benefits I was talking to Mike Seeklander about last night, man, we do these Zoom coaching sessions Thursday nights about 5 o'clock Central Time. We'll jump on with our members. Any member, whether you're a member of the American Competitive Shooting Society or American Warrior Society, you can join Mike and I, sip on a little beer from your couch and your leather-bound books or the range, wherever you happen to be, and we'll hang out and answer some Q&A for you. Okay, let's see, man. We got 27 people on. Thanks for joining. We are going to jump into it. Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself, brother.
Oh, man. Without having my resume readily available. Let's see. I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, deployed once to Iraq. At the end of my enlistment, I got stop loss for that, so that was super fun. And then became a police officer in 2007 after I finished up my degree at Georgia Southern University. Been doing that ever since. Been on patrol the entire time. In that time, I've handled canines. I had SWAT thing, still kind of doing that. I'm a patrol supervisor now. Somebody gave me the maybe supervisor. They were a mistake. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, what were they thinking?
Really yeah, no kidding, right? So now being a patrol sergeant, I enjoy that. The role's a little different than it was. I was, regularly just as a patrol officer. I say the roles kind of changed. I have to look out for more people now than just myself. So, there's little different roles there, but all in all, it's just pretty good gig. Being on patrol, the old tip of the spear, buddy, where we interface with the public.
So you've been on patrol for 13 years, is that right?
Yeah, and I recently got into competitive shooting 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think something like that. Purple belt in jiu-jitsu. Most days I feel like I should probably turn that back in for a white belt though. Whew. And that's about it. That's the briefest rundown I guess I could give you.
Sweet. Guys, thanks for joining us. Please like and share. And let's see who's on this morning, man. There's some names that, let's see, you may know. Let's see. Rasmick is on. Sydney is on. Will Parker is on. Walt Davis, Brett Parker, Rasmick. Good morning, sir. Sean, good morning. Well, if you're a coin member of the American Warrior Society, put your coin number up and let me know where you're at. Jared is on. Good morning, Jared. Let's see here. Les is on. David is on. Donald is on. Great. We've got 34 folks joining us live. Please like and share. We're going to get into the questions now. So we got your background out of the way, man. Having said all the stuff that you're doing, what is your, and because you've been in patrol for 13 years, man, I was a cop for just a fraction of that time. What is your opinion of the state of law enforcement today?
State of law enforcement. Well, people are going to have to kind of forgive me. I'm having my first monster of the morning, so I may be a little all over the place. I'm all hopped up on Mountain Dew, but so the current state of law enforcement right now is pretty bad at the moment, right? Had the incident in Minneapolis, which I don't think any law enforcement officer out there is really supporting, you know, if you break that incident down, I think at some point common sense has to take over and you have to not kneel on somebody's back for a kid. You know, I mean, it is what it is. Now, is that something he was trained in? Is that something, you know, that department, you know, taught him or advocates? I have no idea. That'll change how that incident plays out in court if it is. But I don't think any patrolman out there thinks it's a great idea to kneel on somebody's back for him. It is what it is. Now, and then now you've got the incident in Atlanta where officers did do the right thing. The evidence supports that they were justified in what they did. And then you have a rogue DA who is trying to, you know, pull the old Kansas City shuffle, look over here because I'm going over here kind of thing to, you know, take a little heat off his own investigation where he was, you know, allegedly swiping money from some sort of charity organization he belonged to. And he's charging officers, which, you know, everybody can see the body cam and kind of see, well, okay, that's probably justified. And he's charging them with some trumped up charges where they could get the death penalty. And luckily, Atlanta PD has said they're not going to tolerate that. And so they've kind of, you know, done walkouts or, you know, the old blue flu kind of deal, and they're not showing up to work. So, you know, the goal to talk about commitment to community, you know, which it's like at some point, if the politicians, which, you know, don't get me started on the politics involved in police work, because, you know, police work shouldn't have a whole lot of politics in it. But unfortunately, in our society where everything's so polarized, they've shoved politics into it. And now it's like, okay, you're going to keep abusing these officers, not standing up for them, not trying to present the community with a fair and impartial look at this thing. You're going to try to give these guys the death penalty for doing their jobs, and you expect them to turn around and come to work. You expect them to keep putting their lives and their families' lives and their financial, you know, stability on the line so that what you can trump up some more charges and put them in prison. And then you want to talk about the community? It's like, come on, get out of here. Get out of here with that crap.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to ask you, Andrew, like I've always said that it was a really misguided attempt at marketing to put protect and serve on the sides of every black and white out there in America, when in reality, that's not the tenet of law enforcement, which I think leads back to something that you said a moment ago, and that is that politics really has no place in it. Politicians write the law. You know, you once you've written the law, the gavel's been smacked, the ink is dried, it's the new law. We're going to go out and enforce that law. If you don't want to make it a law to get a DUI, then take it off the books. But as long as it's a law, then a gentleman like Rashad Brooks can go, you know what, guys, you caught me. Go ahead and call me a cab. Because he said something like that right before he was taken into custody or attempted to take it into custody. And what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, man. It's like, I've always looked at it like this. Like, I work for the Constitution. My department signs my paycheck, right? And there are some officers that view law enforcement and being a cop as like a calling. I view something like I don't want to call it a job, but I view something as being a calling, like being a pastor or a preacher, right? You're called. It's a job you would do, you know, probably for free because you're called to do it. Would I do law enforcement for free? No. You pay me and I'll do this. Now, is there a ethical or moral component of, yes, I don't want to see innocent people get taken advantage of or get victimized by other people. So, you know, it's kind of like the whole, you got criminals who are preying on victims. They're preying on the weaker people that can't defend themselves. So yes, I'll step in there from an ethical standpoint or moral standpoint and say, you know what, I'll take up your fight for you. But at the same time, I do that for money. You know, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's just the way it is. there's kind of a duality there of where, yes, this is a job and I'm being paid, but at the same time, I'm trying to do good things for people who can't defend themselves against other folks. So it's a lot more dual than just like being a pastor and saying I'm going to go spread the word of God, and I would do it for free, and I'll do it from poverty if I have to,
Right.
to get that message out. To me, those are two different things. But that's just like my opinion, man. So that's just kind of the way I look at it. So if you start challenging that, like in Atlanta Police Department, you start affecting their ability to make a living for their family, or you're trying to put them in prison, which will, a second, third order effect, they can't earn money for their families, and you expect them to keep coming to work. Oh man, it's kind of like the whole blue flu deal is not really the nuclear option, because the nuclear option is just all police officers quit and you're on your own. It's kind of like, hey, this is a preview to the movie, right? So APD is trying to show the mayor, like, look, if you abuse us, this is what you can look forward to, but we're not completely gone yet. We're just wanting you to change. And since nobody's sticking up for them, that's kind of the only option they have.
Yeah.
So if the mayor's not going to defend them, and the silent majority is not going to come out and start getting on these politicians and telling them, this is what we as a community collective want. We want law enforcement here. Then their only option is to do a blue flu kind of thing. Is it the best option? Probably not. It's like the best worst option kind of thing. But when it's all you got, it's all you got. It's like I can either blue flu or I can quit. It's like, well, if I quit, I can't really come back. I can't say, hey, here's a little view of what you're getting, but okay, we'll change things, we'll work together and get back in. Because once you quit, you're gone, and it takes a long time to get back if that.
Well, and I understand it from the position of the officers that, do you really want to walk away, especially if you're close to retirement? I've been retired from the Marine Corps now for 8 years and enjoying all the benefits of being a retired officer. I can imagine the moral dilemma I would be in if I was an Atlanta police officer, that was tenured, looking at 2 to 3 more years and I can retire. It would be hard to walk away. But at the same time, I agree with you. I think it's one of the only ways that those officers can peacefully protest, to borrow someone else's phrase. But I want to come back to Mr. George Floyd. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about Rashad Brooks and that incident there. I want to get your thoughts on Chaz, that autonomous zone up in Seattle. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, what was it, about 150 years ago, maybe a little more, there was another group that decided they would take some of America and call it not America again. And that didn't go so well for them. So I don't think we can, as a United States, let that continue to grow. I think Seattle needs to do something about that. If they're not going to, then at some point it's going to grow and grow, and they're going to take more and more city blocks, and then the federal government's going to have to come in, and that's never a good thing. It's like handle your own community, handle your own shit. Don't let the feds get involved. It's not going to be good if they do, because your local law enforcement are people that are part of your community. They're your neighbors. They're your people you go to church with. They're people you see at the grocery store and wherever else. The federal government is this entity that is far, far away. And when it comes in, they're not members of your community. And they operate totally different than your local, sheriff's deputy or police officer. So it's not going to be good when they come.
I tell you what's interesting, man, is somebody just said here, let's see. I'm going to come back to some of the comments because we got some good comments flying in there. What I will say is one solution I've heard is treat them like they want to be treated. You want to be an autonomous zone inside the United States of America? Not a problem. We're going to build a wall around you. You're going to have to get documentation. If you want to come back, we're going to shut off the water, the Wi-Fi, the electricity, because you're autonomous, right? So you don't need any of that. And oh, by the way, if you want food trucked in, you're going to have money to pay for it. And you're going to pay international tariffs and duties and things of that nature. And that will go that will go south for them quick, because right now I think what's going on in Chaz is something akin to living in mommy and daddy's basement, but being mad at mommy and daddy. Like, hey, man, mommy and daddy are paying the bills. Mommy and daddy are giving you water and Wi-Fi so you can do your sim life from the basement. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely, man. It's a tantrum. It's a I hate you, mommy, and then they run down to the basement, and then go, well, by the way, when's dinner gonna be ready?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no,
Meatloaf.
you spread your little 2 inches of topsoil out on some cardboard and make your little garden. That little garden patch they showed didn't look like it would grow kudzu.
Yeah. Okay, let's get some of the comments here. Thanks to the 42 folks that are joining us. Please like and share as we get to some of your comments here this morning. First, Dave Frazier, our good friend, says you got to get better looking guests, and he's absolutely correct. Thank you, Dave, for that.
Dave wouldn't know much. He's a fireman. Don't worry, we'll make the scene safe for him.
Oh, are you saying he's a second responder?
Yeah, that's what Cody likes to tell Dave. He's a second responder, not quite a first responder just yet.
I also want to get you to talk about GunJitsu Podcast. Don't forget to talk about that. But anyway, let's talk about. See, Donald says what I believe is that these politicians are trying to get rid of law enforcement and abolish the Second Amendment and next to tyrannical government. In my opinion, you may be right. It's hard to say, but it certainly seems like that sometimes.
Well, I mean, if you look at like Saul Alinsky's book, right, and it starts talking about the steps. If we look at history and we look at how Hitler, you know, Germany was an industrialized nation. They weren't, living in a third world country. Germany wasn't a third world country before World War II. It was an industrialized nation. And somehow Adolf Hitler took an industrialized nation of the time, a first world country of the time, and did all that evilness with it. And there were steps that were followed. And so if you're watching these steps now, getting rid of the police, your local police, is a great way to have a federal police. And that's not good. That's the brown shirts. You don't want the brown shirts to come in. They're a lot less understanding. They're a lot less easier to get along with. They're there to further a political agenda. So this war on police that's being trumped up by the media and all these super far left individuals is not good. There's a plan there. If you ask me, and I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, I think we went to the moon and all that sort of stuff, and that the Earth is round. But you see these things playing out in politics, and they're playing out step by step, and we've seen this happen before. But I think a lot of this that's going on is a failure of the educational system. We have an educational problem in America, and we have a lack of personal accountability. And those are all, more complex than that, but that's, your headers right there, is people aren't learning history in school. We don't teach like civics anymore, right? So you're getting these kids going through high school, and then they're getting 18, they're graduating, they're going out into the adult world. They haven't learned a damn thing in high school about how to get along in the adult world. They haven't learned, how the legal system functions. And so now they're all up in arms and they're protesting something they really, a lot of them are protesting things they know nothing about. You got all these college kids out here talking about how they, hate the police, hate the government and all that. They have no idea how it even works. And so it's like, how are you going to protest something that you don't even understand how it works? And it makes no sense. If there is a problem or a perception problem, or if there's a legitimate problem between law enforcement and the Black community in America, then we need to sit down and have a conversation. Breaking shit and rioting doesn't get your message across, right? And we've been fortunate in our town because the peaceful protesters, and they truly are peaceful protesters. We have a group here that protests, they carry their signs, they get their message out, and they have done very well in distancing themselves from the handful of people in this town that tried to break windows downtown and things like that. They kicked them out of their movement. And so now this handful of individuals that wanted to just break and riot and all that stuff are on an island. And so the police, our agency, is working with the protesters to have that conversation and get things worked out. And these other people who are breaking stuff, neither side, whether it's the police or the peaceful protesters, want anything to do with them. So they're out on their own. And we haven't had very many problems due to that, because we help the peaceful protesters get their message out, protect their First Amendment rights. And then when you come in with bricks and start throwing them through windows, get a pepper ball.
Yeah. I like that. To me, that's exactly the way it should work. We ask these peaceful protesters to, police their own. And if there's a rioter amongst them or somebody that has ill intent, to identify them and point them out to the law enforcement. I think we in the law enforcement community need to police our own as well and hold those accountable who are stepping outside. And I know you'd agree with that. I want to get to TC's question here, or his comment. TC says, you do it for money, sure, but I'd imagine the job is how you're wired, Andrew. For example, I'm glad there are pediatric oncologists, but I'm not going to do that job. Not my wheelhouse. Finding and catching those who victimize others is your wheelhouse. And I want you to respond to that, but I also want to throw my own thoughts on there. And my thoughts are that, society asks police officers, hey, go enforce the law. And in order to do that, police officers, we as a society, those that pay your paycheck, we understand that you can't do that without the threat of force or the use of force. And then society says to the law enforcement professional, we want you to use only reasonable, necessary, and justified force, the minimal amount necessary to accomplish your goals. And then we will back you and support you if you do that. And I think one of the things that we see with the blue flu in Atlanta is that covenant, that compact between the society and the law enforcement officer has been broken. So can you touch on both of those things real quick?
Yeah, it's a lot of it. Well, first of all, you have to understand one basic premise. People don't like losing their freedom. People want to do what they want to do, right? Everybody, especially if you don't have a like a family unit, right? We have a kind of a family problem in America. Families aren't mother, father, child, or male role model, female role model, child, or whatever, right? That nuclear family that we used to have in America is kind of broken down. And so a lot of that can cause second and third order effects later on in life. When I was a kid, my old man beat that ass. And I mean, maybe as a kid, so looking back on it, some people may have said, he probably got it too much. But I'll attribute my old man's belt to probably keeping me from a life of crime, very early on, because I was a handful. And so, when you don't have, especially if you believe in the nuclear family, you have the mother component, which is, your mom is usually the caring one. She's the one that, kisses your boo-boos and all that sort of stuff. And then your dad, he loves you, but at the same time, your dad's not to be trifled with. The old man will put a belt across your rear end when you get out of line. So you have the discipline component. And a lot of that breeds personal accountability. You learn that, okay, you can care for people or you can care for others, but at the same time, they need to understand that you can't just do what you want. You can't go through life doing what you want. And so the law is merely an agreement of the community that says, hey, we're all going to act within these parameters and everything's going to be good. But if you get outside of that parameter, we're going to send these law enforcement agents to hold you accountable. And it's the same with cops, right? Cops are the same way. I've seen other officers go to prison, and guess who put them there? Other cops, right? And so we don't like anybody to step outside the law enforcement line either and turn to a life of crime. So we handle that. The incident in North Charleston, I believe it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, where the officer shot the guy in the back and
Walter Scott,
took his taser up there and put him down. That guy's in prison.
Oh yeah.
That officer's in prison. And who put him there? Other police officers, because we don't tolerate that shit either. And to think that things get swept under the rug and all that stuff it's ludicrous, right? It's a misunderstanding. It does not happen. Most cops don't like their internal affairs unit
Yeah.
because they know that like these guys are keeping track of them. And when I say don't like, it's like kind of a joking thing, right? But at the same time, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have to sweat these guys. The worst complaint you're probably going to get is somebody thinking you're rude. I don't like rude. Rudeness is a perception, kind of.
Yeah.
So
And go ahead.
no, I was about to say. So back to your questions. Like I said, Monster, I'm kind of all over the place.
Well, thanks for being on, and thanks to the 43 folks that are watching right now. Yeah, having been an investigator in the Marine Corps, I was investigating Marines, and I put a lot of Marines in the brig for their bad conduct, and their bad conduct could have been infidelity, because here in America, if you're working at the Piggly Wiggly and you have an affair with someone that you work with, nobody cares. At most, the manager might have a talk to you guys, whatever, if it becomes a problem for the company. But in the Marine Corps, that's punishable by time in prison. So I investigated all kinds of stuff and hold those people accountable. Now, here's the point: that when it comes to accountability, all I think law enforcement does, and all that I did as an investigator in the Marine Corps or as a police officer, was I find all the facts, right? I compile them and I hand them over to somebody. You do with them what you will, which is one of the reasons why I never got upset if one of my cases fell out because the attorneys bungled it. I mean, it's like, hey, man, I gave you a perfect, pristine product because I feel that this is what's been done here is wrong. If you guys can't get it through the courts and this scumbag put away, then that's your problem. Well, maybe that's me.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, you go where the evidence takes you, right?
Yep.
So everybody that's watching wants you to go after this is over. Watch this to the very end. Give Rich your support, right? Go watch the full video you can find of the Atlanta shooting, and watch how the officer goes from one piece of evidence to another. You can hear Mr. Brooks when he starts. Well, number one, he's asleep in the drive-through in his car. When you fall asleep in the drive-through, if you've watched the first 48 or any of those cop shows, Law and Order, it's like, dun dun, there's a clue, right? It's like, maybe the guy's narcoleptic. I don't know. So let's get him out of the car and talk to him. Well, then you start talking to him, right? You can tell by his speech patterns and his slurred speech that he's under the influence of something. So you're continuing to talk. This is all investigative, right? You're continuing to talk. Then he says, if I remember correctly, that he had 2 margaritas. Well, you'll find out as the officer comes back to that later in the little conversation they're having. He starts talking about, well, I had 2 of something, some kind of drink at the bar. So he was very specific on the front end, but as we circle back, he can't remember what he told the officer, which, anybody that's been a policeman for 10 minutes and has arrested somebody that's drunk and had to drive them to jail. I mean, how many times do you hear, what am I going to jail for? What am I going to jail for? Well, you're intoxicated, public intoxication or whatever. And then they're like, oh, okay. 5 minutes later, what am I going to jail for? What am I going to jail for? So it's like they can't remember because of the alcohol. And so they go through that, and you see the evidence leading that officer right down to this guy's intoxicated and he's driving.
Yeah.
DUI is illegal in most states. And so then, it comes down to taking him into custody. Well, once he tries to bargain and he wants to go here, go there, or call a cab or this and that. Officers do have discretion, but if an officer allows you to get a ride home, that is solely up to their discretion if they want to do that or don't want to do that. Ultimately, they're supposed to arrest you. Most agencies are going to guide you to, when it's DUI, you need to arrest them. Does it always happen? No. Do officers allow people to phone a friend or drive them home? That happens sometimes too. And that's the beauty of discretion. You don't want robotic police. You don't want RoboCop. Citizen, you have broken the law, you must go to jail kind of thing every single time. You don't want that. You want that discretion so that when you're stopped for speeding and you're having, some sort of issue, where maybe you're trying to get to the hospital because, your wife fell and broke her leg or something like that, that an officer can just say, okay, well, you just be careful. You're not going to do her any good if you have a wreck while you get there. So, get there, but but try to do it safely. You want that discretion, because if not, they just give you a ticket anyway and you go on, right? So then you go into, he tells Mr. Brooks to place his hands behind his back, and he starts to take him into custody. So at that point, Mr. Brooks chooses to no longer be peaceful, and he starts to run. He starts to fight. At some point, he gets the taser and turns around and points and fires it at the officer. Now, I don't know what taser Atlanta PD issues. There are multi-shot tasers. Tasers are still, dangerous even if they've been deployed, because the wires still have contact. So every time you press that trigger, you're going to get some juice going down those wires. Not to mention that you can just touch it to an individual and still get what's called a drive stun. So the taser is not, one and done. Once it's deployed, it's like, oh well, this thing's just blasted. No, the taser is still very active and very useful. And I say useful, I'm not a huge taser fan, but it's still able to be used even with the cartridge full. So there's still another risk now. If you catch him with a deployed taser, now you're still having to fight the taser. It can still incapacitate.
Yeah, one of my points is, and I think maybe Greg Ellifert's hit on it too, is during Mr. Brooks fighting the two police officers on the ground and resisting arrest feloniously with violence. I wouldn't know for certain that my partner's firearm wasn't in play. You know what I'm saying? So when he's firing from like this, how do I not know that that's a firearm being fired at me? I mean, I don't think in the heat of the moment, like the Supreme Court says, you can't ask an officer to have detached apathy or whatever it is in the face of an upheld knife. I mean, I don't think you can ask the police officers, I don't know what you're firing at me. I don't know that he was completely patted down. And I don't know that the officer Rolfe knew that the what the weapon was being fired at him. I think that's reasonable. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, in a grappling match, in law enforcement, they keep issuing all these trinkets to go on our belt that are supposed to help us. But if you're in a grappling match with that, you don't know what somebody's coming up with. So if they do that with something in their hand, you have no idea what it is. It's like you're supposed to stand around and let them shoot you in the face first and be like, oh, that was a gun. Maybe I should get my gun now. No, you can't expect anyone to do that. I wouldn't expect a civilian who carries a gun concealed to wait on that kind of confirmation. And it all boils down, we go back to personal accountability. Mr. Brooks could have chosen not to drink that night. He could have chosen not to drink and get in his car. He could have, chosen anything to keep him from falling asleep in a drive-through. He could have chosen not to run. He could have chosen not to fight. He could have chosen not to gain control of the taser. He could have chosen not to point it at the police officers that were trying to take him into custody. He could have done any of those things. He could have gotten off that train at any point, and he did. And his own choice to stay on that train of violence led to his ultimate demise. You ever watch Westworld? Remember in the first season they say violent means have violent ends? That's what it is. He chose, because probably, if I remember correctly, he was either on probation or parole, or he was out of jail for COVID or something like that. He knew he was going back. And, you'd be surprised. People don't like to go to prison, and sometimes they fight it. And sometimes they fight it all the way to the end. So we can't blame police for poor decision making on someone else's part. They were just a mechanism. It's their job to take him into custody, and that's what they were doing. If you watch real close on the video, you'll hear Officer Rolfe say, something like, put your hands behind your back, please, sir, or please put your hands behind your back, sir. He was being completely as polite as he could be given the circumstances. It's like, it's unfortunate, I'm going to have to take you into custody, but he gave him an opportunity to do it peacefully, and he chose the other route. And now we're gonna charge Officer Rolfe with a charge that could potentially get him the death penalty for doing his damn job. And then you want other officers to show up? and keep coming to work.
You know, and the other, to your point though, I love the way you frame that, because I agree with it 100% in regards to, this is not what Rich Brown of the American Warrior Society or Andrew Kieth or anybody would have chosen for Mr. Brooks. This isn't what I wanted to have happen. This is not what Officer Rolf, whatever,
Rolf.
Officer Rolf or his partner wanted for Mr. Brooks. They wanted to, have him comply, go to jail. I wish that Mr. Brooks was out on bond right now, having breakfast with his family. That's what I wish would have happened. But we have to recognize that these are the choices that he made to fight the police, to try to harm the police with his own violence, and he met a very violent end. But let's switch gears real quick. Let's talk about, because these incidents happen in light of what happened with Mr. George Floyd, and you mentioned him briefly at the beginning of the show. What are your thoughts on that incident, Andrew?
Like I said, I think at some point common sense has to kick in, and you can't kneel on somebody's back and neck for 10 minutes. Now, that being said, Andrew Bronca has made several points on his Facebook account also. Is there are drugs involved in Mr. Floyd's system. It does not excuse the officer's conduct. Don't get me wrong. So the way I look at it is, probably more than likely the officer had some hand in Mr. Floyd's dealing on him, not going to lead to anywhere good. How much of that, I don't know. How much of that is going to be the totality of all the evidence, whether, the drugs played a part in it through like something like excited delirium, whether his training for Minneapolis said, hey, it's okay to kneel on somebody's back, and hold them down, and this sort of stuff. I think it highlights a good issue that a lot of people, especially even cops, don't really understand, and that's jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And we deal in controlling people. Every officer needs to take jiu-jitsu, period.
Yep.
And it needs to be mandatory in my mind. I can only punch you in the face at one speed, right? I can either hit you or I can't. With jiu-jitsu, I can scale the force up or down depending on the situation. We've got a huge misunderstanding on what police call the LVNR, what you would call in jiu-jitsu the rear naked choke, right? There's a huge misunderstanding because of the Eric Garner incident, right? Eric Garner, the officer's forearm was across his throat. Now, number one, Eric Garner, the reason those officers were not convicted is because Eric Garner was in terrible health. Terrible. He had a myriad of health problems. And, it's like, don't show up for a fight when you're not in fight shape. When you've got all these huge problems, any physical stress could result in you having a heart attack or whatever else his health problems were. He was very obese. He had health issues with his heart and his cardiovascular system. So Eric Garner could have went for a jog that day and died because that's stress on the body. So any stress on his body, it being in poor shape, could have led to his demise. Now, when you get to the choke, was it even a choke? I don't know. The officer had Eric Garner around the neck. He had his forearm right there. It's not an LVNR. So you can't say the LVNR is bad because what he was doing wasn't the LVNR.
No.
I can bear hug your leg and call it an LVNR. It's not going to be an LVNR. It's just not, And so a lot of people don't understand too that the second and third order effects, again, we get into this, that there's much more to the story than the headlines. We're a nation of headlines. All we do is read the damn headline, and we don't read the article, and we don't understand what's going on. The LVNR, the rear naked choke, is a great application for keeping officers and suspects safe. We used it up until recently when our department kind of gave in to the demands of banning chokeholds, right? And I'll give you a prime example, a little war story from some of my officers. They have a guy who's in a car, right? I believe he had warrants. They go to ask him to get out of the vehicle. He pretty much tells them to piss off. So they have a little conversation through the window, and where they're trying to get him to, on his own, get out of the car. And one of my officers basically says, "Get out of the car, we're going to drag you out." And the guy looks at him and says, "I'll kick your ass." So 3 of them pull him out of the car. The guy immediately, it's like putting a cat in a bathtub. As soon as they pulled him out, he was fighting from the word go. They kind of tackled him down to the ground. One of the officers LVNRs him. You can hear him snoring on their belt mic. The other 2 cuff him up. Done. The guy gets up. 0 injuries. Doesn't even complain of injuries. He doesn't even know kind of what happened. He went out. He was cuffed. He came back. And he's like, kind of like, what the hell just happened? Right? So it's very safe. This is what blows my mind, right? Like, this literally blows my mind, because a certain segment of society says, "Oh, LVNR, it's lethal force, deadly." But then, we pay, what is it now? I don't know, it used to be like $39.99. You could go watch a UFC on Saturday night on pay-per-view, and the rear naked choke is condoned and encouraged by the Nevada Gaming Commission, the Boxing Gaming Commission. Their doctors have looked into it. All the research has been done to show this, is not without risk, but it presents a very low risk of injury to someone it is applied upon. But yet we have over here, they say, "Oh, it's the Denmark death touch." And then over here, they're like, "Nah, go ahead. Use it at will. It's fine." That makes no sense. Anybody that's taken jiu-jitsu has probably been choked unconscious a few times in their life. It's not that big of a deal. And the research, if anybody's interested in looking at it, is a place, I've got it pulled up here on my computer. It's from the University at Calgary of Alberta. What they took was 24 healthy police officer volunteers that range from 27 to 40, males and females. And they had a guy who was certified in the LVNR or whatever they were calling it, and he applied it to them and basically choked all but 4 of them unconscious. And they used unconscious. They passed basically a light in front of them, and they were tracking it with their eyes as he applied the technique. And once their eyes got in the old 1,000-yard stare, they were deemed unconscious, right? 0 injuries. They had all these monitors hooked up, and what they figured out is it does not shut off blood flow to the brain. It decreases it to basically trigger the mechanism of the brain going unconscious. There's no vagal breathing, which is, the death breathing. There were 0 signs by all the monitors, heart rate monitors. They even had a cuff around their neck to test, the pressure and all that. 0 issues. 0. There was nothing that led those doctors down the path of this could be deadly. And they even said, while it's not without risk, there's always some risk when you're having to use, physical force to, against another human being. There's always some risk, but with this one, it's very minimal. And now they're banning. So now I can punch you in the face, but I can't just choke you unconscious and cuff you up. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as a bouncer for years and years and years, I choked out a lot of people, maybe dozens of people. And to your point, they would normally, when they regain consciousness, have no memory of maybe the 5 preceding seconds. So they woke up very, hey, what's going on? Like, this is a guy that was aggravated, active, aggressing me, fighting me for everything he's got. He goes to sleep, he comes to, and he's like, "Oh, cool. Where's my car at?" So I think and I had no problems, but I tell you, it requires a lot of maturity and a lot of training. To your point about all law enforcement officers should do jiu-jitsu, because I remember choking a guy one time, and I had him across my back because we were in a very tight space. And so that way, because I had him across my back and in a LVNR, I could not tell when he went unconscious. To make matters worse, at first he's fighting me with his hands, and then one of the other bouncers pulls his hands away. So I remember yelling to Tommy, who had the guy's hands, saying, "Hey, Tommy, tell me when he's out. Tell me when he's out," because I did not want to hold that choke for a second longer than I absolutely had to. And the owner of the club was watching all this go down, and I cradled his head to the ground so it didn't ricochet off we were out there in front of Jackson Avenue in Knoxville. And I didn't want to bounce off the cobblestone, so I lowered him to the ground. We held him in a restraint till the police got there. But my point is saying all that is, there is a very safe way to take people into custody. And I think it requires a great deal of training. And to that point, I want to bring up something, Andrew, that a lot of people are saying. And that is, what if law enforcement were provided with 1 day a week that they had to do nothing but dedicated training? Would that make a difference? And if so, why?
Yeah, that's already been proposed in I know our department, or at least I know some officers are kicking. There's a cultural issue with police training, right? I'm not here to say police are perfect and everything else is the problem. No, we have our own problem, right? You have officers that don't want to train. You have officers that don't, their egos don't want them to feel embarrassed when they don't know anything, right? Because I'll be honest with you, man. Like my buddy Cody, our friend Cody, who's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, man. When I roll with Cody, I've got it on 10, and I don't get anywhere. So it's like, man, you got to put that ego in a box when it comes to things like that. It's the same with shooting, right? Like when we shoot together, and you probably heard me say this before, it's like, if you're not pushing yourself to the point you're failing a little bit, you're getting a miss or two here and there in training, you're not trying hard enough. And you're just staying in your comfort zone, and in your comfort zone is as good as you'll ever be. So it's like, you go to jiu-jitsu, man, as a white belt, you're going to get wrecked over and over and over again. So you take your ego, you put it in a box, and you learn. Because there's a helpless feeling that comes from when a higher belt gets a hold of you and you've been training for a month, that you realize, number one, you're pretty much helpless against this person. And, two, it's like, okay, well, I've got to start learning from this. That way I can become the higher belt. So you have to make officers train. That 1 day a week would be perfect, because you can't be an expert in anything in 40 hours. And in a lot of the police culture, we're so worried about the little piece of paper. I'm trying to get centered up on the camera here, so weird place, right? So we get this little piece of paper, this little certification. I went to a 40-hour course, so now I've got this piece of paper. I can put my training file. I'm an expert. You ain't an expert on shit in 40 hours. You're just not. There's no scientific evidence that'll support that. A lot of evidence says like something like 10,000 hours, and then you can be considered an expert. So you gotta force that training, and I think forcing that training at a time like now, you'll get the new officers coming in will start to build that mentality in their own mind, like, hey, this is the way. This is just the way we do it. There's no more of this at DT training, standing on the sidelines and watching but not participating kind of thing. The newer officers are going to be getting in there and training because that's all they know. They've been told that from day one in the academy, that like, if you're here, you're going to train. These other officers that are, older or whatever, have all these years, and they're showing you the way, and you're going to fall in line, and you're going to train. Because in service, 40 hours a year, some departments, that's all they get. And you can't tell me that 40 hours in a year, you're really learning anything. At best, you're maintaining what you are. But I don't even think then, I think even that's a bit of a stretch. So you have to do it. You have to force it until it just becomes the new normal.
Now, I agree with you, man. And just so you know,
And I
that
think,
looks like, Andrew, real quick, it looks like the Wi-Fi went down for a while. Thanks to the 47 folks that are joining us. They probably missed a good 30 seconds of what you said, but I think the intent of your point got through there. And that is, 40 hours
well, I
doesn't
think,
make an expert, right?
yeah, and I think too, part of that mentality in the police world is, it falls back to what cities and departments want, right? And what the community, you know, sort of wants or thinks they want, right? The departments in these cities or agencies and departments want to protect themselves from liability. right? So they get these certifications, these minimum standard pieces of paper, so that they can say, we are decreasing our exposure to liability. I say put that shit in the trash. Put it in the trash. Our mentality needs to shift to developing good officers, developing their training, develop them into better officers. And yes, that means things like offering them jujitsu, offering them more rounds to shoot every year, because the second and third order effects of that is a confidence, right? It's like when I was in the academy, and a lot of agencies still teach this, right? They say, never shake anybody's hand. They could pull you in and, try to kill you, right? It's kind of a fear thing, right? So these new officers are like, I'll fist bump you, pal, and it's like, look, dude, and I'm not saying this to brag, because I would say the same thing about you or Cody, right? We're both belted in jujitsu. If you shake my hand, who's at risk here?
You.
Like, you're going to give me a grip right up front. By all means, shake my hand. Pulling me in is going to be bad for you, not bad for me, because I'm worried about getting punched in the face and getting knocked out, because I'm not much of a striker. But if you're going to go ahead and give me that grip, by all means, shake my hand. It's like I have no problem shaking anybody's hand. Like I said, I'm just not worried that they're going to pull me in and be able to do anything. They're going to pull me in and realize that was terrible. That was a terrible life decision. And then I've got that jiu-jitsu skill set that is useful in that scenario. So I don't have to fear the handshake, right? I'm not afraid of it. Here, shake my hand, man. If you have good intentions, then we'll have a pleasant conversation, and hopefully, you'll see that law enforcement officers are just people too. If you want to pull me in and try to do me harm, hopefully that's not going to go for you the way you thought.
Yeah. Hey, I want to.
There's not that fear there.
No, and I want to talk about something somebody, I think it's Will Parker, put on here. He says, why don't Leos, law enforcement officers, pay for their own training? And I will tell you up front, I was a police officer in the late 90s. I paid for most of the training I went to. I took my vacation time and paid for the training. So, and I think Doug Lightfoot said he does the same thing, so most of the training I ever did, they didn't pay for me to go to judo or Aki Jiu-Jitsu. I paid for that out of my pocket. They didn't pay for me to go to the NRA Police Firearms Instructor course. I paid for that. They didn't pay for me to go to Defensive Tactics Instructor course. I paid for that. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm in the same boat, man. Like, I shoot, since I've gotten into competitive shooting, probably at least the past 3 years, I have shot 20,000 rounds or more every year. So I paid for out of my own pocket. I didn't get department rounds because they can't afford to give me that volume of ammo. So I paid for 20,000 rounds out of my own pocket. Because again, if you translate that jiu-jitsu knowledge on the handshake, then you translate that to like the handgun, right? I'm right on the cusp of A class in USPSA, and I'm a master class IDPA shooter. So when I have to get my gun out at work, there's not a lot of thought about, okay, I need to grip it like this. Okay, I need to align the sights like that. Okay, my finger needs to be straightened off the trigger until I've made the conscious decision to fire. I need to make sure, and in my case, take the thumb safety off. There's none of that, right? So I'm freeing up all that RAM inside my head to make a good decision on whether this person needs to be shot or not, because I'm not having to think about these other little minute steps of holding the gun or drawing the gun, and it's not taking up that RAM in my brain. And so if officers, shoot more, you've got to find a way to sell that to the community, because the community needs to understand that if these officers shoot more, they're going to shoot less people. If these officers do more jiu-jitsu, they're going to shoot less people because of the second and third order effects, the confidence, the skill building. If your skill level is high, have you ever heard of recognition prime decision making?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's like they did an experiment with chess players, and they figured out that, if Rich Brown, who probably has only played chess a few times in his life, goes to make a move, it's almost instantaneous that a professional chess player or someone who's highly skilled at chess is going to immediately make another move. they don't need very much information to make an accurate decision. And so that's why, especially for officers, you do jiu-jitsu or you shoot competitively, you don't need as much information to make a good decision. But if your brain's all clogged up with, I need to grip the gun like this, I need to align the sights like that. Now, what was it that firearms instructor told me in the academy to get a good hit? Oh God, all that's getting made up. Where if you're good at it, the gun's just out and you're giving commands. Number one, you're probably quick, so you're getting back closer to being ahead of that curve. You can give verbal commands and allow this person another opportunity to not make this poor decision they're about to make. There's been several times in my career where I've had to point a gun at somebody to get compliance. And there's been a smaller percentage of those incidents where I honestly think the only reason I didn't have to shoot them is because I beat them. And I don't mean like physically. I mean, I beat them with the gun out, with the draw. I was there, they may have thought, hey, I'll just draw my gun and shoot this guy, shoot this officer. But when they looked, I already had my gun out. And so they thought, yeah, I better just give up.
See, and I think that's a great point. And I think you do that with jiu-jitsu, your body language, your demeanor, your use of force before you use force, if you will. And that is smothering out their options. And one of the things that I saw that, like with Rashad, Mr. Brooks there in Atlanta in the Wendy's parking lot, you gave this guy a wide field. He looks in front of him as his hands are being put behind his back. And what does he see in front of him? Nothing but a place to run, right? Because he's fearful. He doesn't want to go back to prison or what have you, because he's out on parole or probation or what have you. We used to teach put an object in front of them to smother their will to, like, I have nowhere to go. I got two officers on me and there's a El Dorado in front of me. I'm smashed up against. I don't have any good decisions to make here. So I think you bring up a good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's, jiu-jitsu is such a scalable martial art that a lot of other martial arts don't have. And, I'm a big jiu-jitsu fan, been doing jiu-jitsu for, a few years now. And, when you look at it in relation to law enforcement, we could teach our officers Muay Thai or any of that other, boxing, karate, any of that stuff, right? But I can only punch you in the face at one speed. I can't scale that down.
Yeah.
So it's like, is there a place for the striking arts? Absolutely. Are you going to have to punch people as a law enforcement officer? Absolutely. But when it comes to wrestling someone down and, just like you said, taking away their options, taking away their will to continue to fight, jiu-jitsu probably does that better than other martial arts. If you've never been caught in Cody's knee on belly, it makes you want to give up pretty quick, Yeah. And so you kind of get that. It's just like with the, if you go, you're a blue belt now. So if you go against a brand new, white belt, someone been training a few months or something, you're going to feel them struggle, right? You're going to do your takedown. You're going to get them on the ground. You're going to start, isolating limbs, and they're going to be struggling like a fish out of water. And then you're going to feel it. You're going to feel them sort of just deflate. You're going to feel that defeat sink in on them. And at that point, if that was a resisting suspect, you could probably just talk them into rolling over and putting their hands, because they've already given it their best shot. It didn't go well. They're getting tired. They're getting winded. And so instead of having to hit them, I can just hold them in side control and just kind of cross face them a little bit and take that will to continue to fighting from them so that they give up peacefully. And then at the end of the day, they're not really that injured. They may have a sore, jaw from the crossface, or, they may be just sore from the physical activity of struggling at 100% and getting nowhere. But at the end of the day, they're not injured. The only thing really hurts their pride.
Yeah. And we've been on an hour here, and I want to be respectful of your time. But I want to talk to something that Brett said. He said, smother their will. Is that the best choice of words? LOL. Let me be very specific here. What I'm talking about is more akin to, in the Marine Corps, we have something called MCDP-1, Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1, that discusses war fighting. And one of the things that it says in one of the very first chapters is the fight is lost twice. Okay. First time it's lost in the commander's own mind that he cannot win, and then he loses for real in the battle space. That's kind of what I'm talking about. That I'm not saying you smother the life out of them like what happened to Mr. George Floyd. And I don't think that's what Brett meant, but I want to be very clear that what we're talking about is more metaphorical, that I take away the will that you have to resist. You realize there are no good options for you but to comply with this officer's lawful arrest, and you will sort it out in court. Like I said on a video I made recently, I've had two different police officers at two different points in my life point loaded firearms in my face, one with a finger on the trigger. And in both instances, I didn't choose that opportunity to fight, or else I wouldn't be here today, because what they were doing at the time was lawful. Now, I thought one of them was excessive. And the first thing I did when I left that interaction with that law enforcement officer was I hired an attorney and I took his ASS to court. So there's a right way and a wrong way to handle these things, but you're going to get whatever outcome that you choose, not what I would choose or what Andrew would choose or any other law enforcement officer would choose. You're going to get the outcome that you chose. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, man. I mean, there there's bad cops out there. It happens. We have a very stringent process to become a law enforcement officer. You do background checks, you take polygraphs, all this sort of stuff. You're pretty much constantly under a microscope when you're on patrol. Everything you do, if you do a use of force, the video is reviewed by your supervisor. The report is done. Then it's reviewed again by internal affairs. It's reviewed by your entire chain of command. So there's definitely accountability in place. But there's also a small, and it's very small in law enforcement, percentage of people who can somehow navigate that process, and you don't know until they actually do something that they really don't need to be. And unfortunately, that's just humanity, right? You don't know a serial killer is a serial killer until he starts killing. There's no kind of way, you never hear you never hear like the news come up, right? When I remember I was kind of was I in high school? I remember, but Jeffrey Dahmer, right? I remember that. I was old enough to remember the news coming on. They interview his neighbors. How many serial killers' neighbors were like, "Oh my God, I'm glad you caught that guy. Jesus, I was in fear for my life. That guy's lived there for 5 years. Oh my God, I just knew any day he was going to break in and kill me." No. Well, they always say, "He was such a nice guy. He was quiet, kept to himself. He was a really good neighbor." Meanwhile, he's over there killing and eating people, right? So there are people that slide through all of these systems. With law enforcement, it's a much smaller percentage than probably any other profession due to the background checks, the polygraphs, and the system in general. But you can never say that it's non-existent. It is existent. And when we find them, we put them in prison.
Yeah.
And then there are officers out there who just might be rude. They're just not people. They're not good at having a conversation with people. There's officers who may have just left something that was some sort of brutal scene, or somebody killed their kid or something, and these things happen, and now you conduct a traffic stop. Somebody flying down the road, right? So you kind of have to do something. You're on the interstate and somebody zips by you at 100 miles an hour. Yeah, a lot of officers, you just can't let that go, so you got to stop them. Well, now it's like, well, are you in the right mental space to be dealing with that? Because you have the pressure of like, well, all these other drivers saw him zip by me at 100 miles an hour. Are they going to call in and be like, "Hey, the cop didn't do shit"? You know, but now you stop this person and you're still a little wound tight from the last call. And there's a again, we talk about problems in policing, right? You have PTSD is a cumulative thing. You have your guys out here, your war fighters, your tier one operators that understand PTSD because they lived in it for a few years, right? And so their intensity of violence, of trauma was here. Their duration was probably like here, right? So if you go on a deployment and it's a rough deployment, you're what, a year, maybe two, before you rotate back out, you rotate back to the world, and you at least get some kind of break, right? So you take your warfighter. I forgot where my hands were. I'm having to look in the camera, right? So your warfighter's intensity is here, his duration is here. So you take cops, and it's like Their duration is here. Because if you spend a lot of time on patrol, you're going to see people's bodies ripped apart by wrecks. You're going to see dead children, which is always rough, especially when some asshole kills a kid. You know, it's bad enough that it's a car wreck, but like here in our city not too long ago, these assholes threw a kid off a second story balcony. Guess who went to that? Police officer, right? And it's all you can do not to want to do what every human wants to do to those people. You have to remain professional. You have to follow the evidence. Your ultimate end game is like, I want to put this person in prison for the rest of their life for the maximum amount allowed by law. You can't just go in there and lose your temper, even though you want to, right? And so every officer on that scene who dealt with that had some trauma, but now they're going to go through that repeatedly throughout a career on patrol. So I think there needs to be better mechanisms in place to rotate officers off patrol and put them in some other side work, whether it's, you know, a DARE program where they're going to talk to kids about not doing drugs, or, you know, some sort of assignment, you know, that's not directly answering those traumatic calls for service. And a lot of officers don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about people. And it's like, it's a real thing. And it changes every little or every traumatic event you go through messes with the way your brain is wired. And that's why officers have these second and third order effects going on in their personal lives. And some of them turn to things like drinking. And we've had some turn to drugs, because it's no different than the veteran community. You know, being a part of both, I can tell you that. You know, it's no different than veterans. Like I said, the only difference is you got your war fighters intensity and duration, and then you've got cops intensity. And there has to be better mechanisms in place. We can't just continue to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and pretend that we don't need some sort of break from street work for a while. Like, I can't even count the number of dead bodies I've seen. You know, you can't even, police will be able to tell you, like, if you smell a dead body, you know, you'll know that smell for the rest of your life. And anytime you smell it again, you'll be like, somebody's dead. And a human dead body smells different than, you know, I'm kind of an outdoorsman too, so I know what dead animals smell like. It's completely different. When you smell it, you know exactly what it is. And things like that, you know, they say, what is it? Smell is the closest sense to like trigger memory.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to deal with that also. And so, you know, you may have an officer 3 years down the road goes on, you know, an old person that died in their house and nobody's checked on them for 2 weeks, and they smell that smell, and it automatically triggers a memory that could have been 6 or 7 years prior. And so now they're having to deal with that. And officers, you know, we need to change the culture of where it's okay to say, you know, I'm having some issues and I need to rotate off the street. But we're always so shorthanded that, you know, a lot of times they say, oh, we can't do that. Well, I don't give a shit. You know, it's these officers' mental health that needs to take priority. You know, if you have somebody in an assignment that isn't patrol work, and somebody needs to come off patrol work for their own mental well-being, then I'm sorry. You know, I'm sorry you've been on this push assignment for 10 years. Put your Class A back on and go answer some damn call. You know, it shouldn't be, entire departments shouldn't depend on the same, you know, percentage of their department that continues to get exposed to all of this, and everyone else gets a cush 9-to-5 job. It's bullshit. I mean, you know me, I've never been one to mince words or sugarcoat things, man. It's the way it is, because that's, again, we talk about second, third order effect, right? That's your patrol is your interface with the public. Do you want these guys going out there with PTSD issues talking to people? No. You're gonna get that rudeness complaint go right up, you know, when an officer's fuse is about that long and somebody's standing there lying to them, and you know they lose their temper and call this person a fucking liar to their face. You know, it's like, that's only gonna get you complaints. If you rotate through and you address the issues on both sides. Like I said, I'm not here to tell you all cops are perfect or all agencies are perfect. We have our issues. They're just not the issues that the media wants you to think they are. You know, we're not out here brutalizing people. You know, police only shoot what is it? few hundred, or is it even 1,000 people a year, in incidents, most of which, like the overwhelming majority of police shootings are justified, like 99% of them. And then you have a couple that aren't, and those officers are in prison.
Well, again, it's like millions of interactions every single day with law enforcement and the community in peacefully. There's nothing there other than getting some directions or getting a cat out of a tree. I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but to your point about law enforcement officers are go under a lot of scrutiny. I remember when I was a cop trying to get a couple of my buddies hired who were former Marines, and these guys had served incredibly well in the Marine Corps, multiple deployments. They were senior non-commissioned officers and good family men, good Marines, et cetera. And yet they could not get hired. It was two real good friends of mine. And it came down to they could not pass the psychological evaluation. So again, we weed out a lot of that stuff before they ever get an opportunity to go onto the road. So society doesn't have the same. So we hold our law enforcement officers to a standard that we expect them to do. Now, so I want to wind this thing down, Andrew. Tell us a little bit about what you're involved right now with regard to GunJitsu.
Oh yeah, GunJitsu Podcast. Me and my buddy, our good friend Cody, who's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. We started this up this year. We've had some good guests on there. We've had some episodes of some mediocre guests, like this Rich Brown guy came on, man, completely bombed it. No.
You're welcome.
But we've had some really good guests on there. The main focus is like, martial arts and guns and trying to kind of get into, a lot of the interface of those because, everything's not a shooting problem. Everything, can't be solved with jiu-jitsu either. So it's just trying to get people's takes on that. It's not, I wouldn't call it like a self-defense type podcast. We try to keep it more like Joe Rogan's show, where we're just having a conversation, kind of like we are here. I don't necessarily like to do the interview style because there might be, I think the rabbit holes in like a podcast is where the information is, not like, so Rich Brown, what did you do before this? You start getting on those topics and you start going down those rabbit holes, and that's where those little golden nuggets are. We've had guests on like Brandon Wright from Smith & Wesson, had you on there. We've had the learned doctor T.C. Fuller on there.
And Cecil Birch on there, right?
Yes, Cecil was on there. We've had Les Pepperoni was on there. Les Kismartoni, he's a blue belt in jiu-jitsu and a GM in USPSA. Les a really good dude. We've had all kinds of people, man. It's been good. We haven't had an episode in a couple of weeks just because of all the things going on with work and stuff. It's kind of, when you get a day off, you just kind of want to sit around and rest and recoup, not necessarily start working on a podcast. We're going to get that fired back up soon. I think we're going to be, I think me and Cody, or maybe just Cody's going to be on Samuel Braga's podcast, our jiu-jitsu coach, who's a 12-time world champion in jiu-jitsu. He's a really good dude. We've had some good folks, man. So GunJitsu Podcast, you can find us on iTunes. And if you do and you listen, give us a review. Click that farthest right-hand star. It helps us get found on there, much like the American Warrior Show. Like I said, we just kind of have conversations, man. Some of our episodes have been an hour. Some of our episodes have been like over 2 hours. It's just wherever the conversation takes us, man.
Hey, last thing I want to talk about something that Brett brought up, and I think it's important. He talks about when cops don't or can't effectively police their own, they shouldn't be surprised by bad activity that casts them on a battle light. And I'll go specifically to the law enforcement officer who held his knee on Mr. George Floyd's neck until he expired. Here's the deal, man. This guy had been a police officer, I want to say 19 years, and I'm not fact checking any of this. This is just what's being reported. 17 use of force complaints during that time. I agree with Brett to a point of this guy should have been pulled off the road. Was he suffering from PTSD? I don't know. I'm sure that will all come out in the trial. But at some point, don't we pull that guy back and say, hey, man, I'm going to make you a DT instructor. I'm going to, one of your things is you're going to attend a jiu-jitsu class and you're going to obtain whatever level. And this is what you're going to do as part of your punishment, perhaps, because now look what's happened. This kind of conduct has been left unchecked until it ends up in this tragedy. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree and simultaneously maybe disagree. Yes, we need to look into those uses of force, but at the same time, you have to understand that when they pull that information from the department and it just says, hey, this guy's had, you know, 17 complaints about uses of force. People complain when you punch them in the face,
Sure.
right? That doesn't mean they are justified complaints. Now, if he's had 17 disciplinary actions taken against him by the department for use of force, or even if he's had just 4 or 5, that's something you need to look into. People complain, right? You know, if you're just because a citizen complains on an officer doesn't mean that it's justified, right? Being a patrol supervisor now, I don't know how many complaints I've had to answer and the person just flat out lied. Because when I went back, I had a lady, matter of fact, I've got a guy on my squad who's he did 2 tours in Vietnam. He's on the tail end of his police career, and he's a good guy, and he doesn't take a lot of shit from people, but you know he's not out abusing people or talking rudely to them or anything. And this lady called in and said that officer flat refused to give me his name and badge number. I play the tape. I'm sitting in the office. I'm playing the tape, and I can hear him because during his 2 tours of Vietnam, one of which was in a tank, he doesn't hear so well. So he talks really loud. So he's really easy to understand on his belt mic, right? So you can hear him flat tell her, my name is, and I'm the only one in the police department. And he is. But she complained on him and flat out lied. And I told her.
Yeah, and I think that needs to be, that we see this happen all the time. Once we ask police officers to start wearing these body cameras, we saw that a lot of times, there was a woman, a very attractive woman, that accused this law enforcement officer of raping her in the Sally Port where she was being taken to jail. And of course, the body camera showed that none of that happened. I want to see those people. First of all, I want to see the officer vigorously and lawfully investigated. Let's find out what's true and what's not true. And once the officer's absolved, then we need to go and press charges on that other person and vigorously take action on that as well. And I think that will stop a lot of this.
Absolutely, man. It's a two-way street, right? Do I want bad cops out there doing things, abusing the public and things like that? Hell no. Either get them fired if that's what they want, or put them in jail if that's what they want. But at the same time, don't call me up complaining on one of my officers with a whole bunch of lies and bullshit, because I'm not going to tolerate that either. I'll call you a liar to your face, and if there's a way I can prosecute you, I'm going to. You know, if you're filing a false complaint or whatever else. We need honesty on both sides. It can't just be a one-way street. It's like the whole hands up, don't shoot thing. If you haven't read the Department of Justice, like 80 something pages of the incident in Ferguson, they only had like I think it was 2 or 3 solid witnesses that didn't flat out lie and actually cooperated with the police. The whole hands up, don't shoot thing was a complete and utter falsehood. It did not happen. But yet somehow that got pushed out into the media, shoved down everybody's throat, and it became what happened, even though it's factually incorrect. It never occurred. He never stopped. He never put his hands up. Nothing. He fought to the end and was coming to get more when he got shot with the fatal shot. Now Ferguson had other issues. You know, apparently they had some issues with the way they were dealing with the public. But you know, if you're an officer, man, go out there and be part of the people. When I ran our project or our housing development, I walked around. You know, walk around, let them see you. Let them see you in more capacity than just, hey, you're out here arresting so and so again, arresting so and so. Walk around, wave at people, talk to them. It's gonna be weird the first time because they're not gonna want to talk to you. But then after a while, man, it's like, okay, officer so and so, man, he'll talk to you. Don't fight with him. because that's not going to go well either, and that's the best rapport you could have is the area you work, everybody understanding that, hey, man, you're a nice guy. But at the same time, when it comes time to, fight the police, that's not the police you want to fight. And you'll have
Yeah.
a much better career that way.
Yeah, I remember when I worked in corrections, I came in when there'd been a riot in the pod that I worked, and I remember coming in and both sides of the riot there was there was some Aryan Brotherhood type folks, there was some East Side folks and some West Side folks, and that all kind of popped off a three-way fight. And when I came back to work, and I'm like, what happened? They were all like, each one of them individually at some point during that first day back said, if you had been here, this would not have happened. Because we know you, we would have talked to you. You could have de-escalated, diffused the situation before it went there. And I think that speaks to your point about walking around and being approachable and someone that you can talk to this guy, and he's going to be firm, fair, and consistent with you. He's not going to be a capricious a-hole. He's going to be somebody that you can talk to and reason with, right?
Absolutely, man. It's like you have to let, when I first came on, community-oriented policing was a big thing. I'm not sure if that's still a mantra. It was actually a whole program kind of thing. But there was a captain that taught in ours. He's kind of a country fellow like me, and I remember him saying, "Hey, start every call like you're Andy Griffith. Be prepared to go, Harry Callahan on them, but at the same time, start every call like you're Andy Griffith. Man, go people, hey buddy, what's going on? How can I help you today?" And it's much better for you in the long run to start that call off, especially, from a supervisor perspective. If you're an officer worried about getting in trouble, if I start hearing you consistently answering these calls with, hey, man, what's going on? How can I help you? Blah, 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 and then it devolves into something that's a fight. You didn't start the fight. You weren't there to, you didn't show up all robotic, or you didn't show up, hey, asshole, why'd you call the cops? That has no place, man. Just, it's like, I've always tried to treat suspects, or anyone in the community for that matter, the way I want to be treated. Now, I'm hard on myself too, right? So if I fight the police, punch me in the mouth. Turnabout's fair play kind of thing, right? But at the same time, don't come up being rude to me, and I won't come up being rude to you. If it goes that way, it'll be by your choice, not mine. Because ultimately, I'd rather everybody just give up. It's safer for me, safer for them. We don't have to go through the stress, get our clothes all tore up and messy for nothing, for something that could be, taken care of in courts. And, then people talk about, oh, well, they don't like law enforcement because people get, how many times have you heard this? People get stiffer sentences for weed, and it's a victimless crime and all this. Guess who has zero control over how much time somebody gets in prison? Cops.
Yeah.
Cops don't sentence a soul. We build a case, we present the evidence. A lawyer comes in from the DA's office, presents that evidence to a jury or a judge. They get the conviction or no. If they get the conviction, then the judge, or, in like death penalty cases, the jury, if they convict them, would pass that sentence also. They give them the sentence, man. We have nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. So, it's like, if it's your whole weed should be legal and people shouldn't be getting, years for victimless crimes, we don't give them years. We don't give them anything. We simply say, here's what we found.
Yeah, and I remember I had a huge investigation. Literally at the end of it, I think the case that I put together was like 7 inches thick, and it was a huge illegal recruiting ring operating down in Florida. The parents were complicit in it, so I had to talk to dozens of parents, and turns out they were all involved in all this illegal behavior. I mean, it was a crazy mess. So it goes to trial, military courts martial. And I remember the prosecution for the government was a Harvard trained lawyer. Okay. But I think he was a captain or a major in the Marine Corps. And he was saying things to me as the investigating officer on the stand, like, isn't it true that da 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 da? And I'm like, absolutely not. I'm like, you're not prepared for this case. You're not asking me the right questions. You're tearing it apart. And we only got a couple of convictions on what should have been a slam dunk, and put these bad actors, these Marines that violated their oath and committed all these crimes, and put them in the brig. But it didn't happen because of the way that they handled it. But I want to start closing it down, Andrew. We've been on here for almost an hour and a half, man. This is by far and away the longest coffee with Rich, but I think it's been phenomenal, man. I appreciate you coming on. Les Richardson mentioned a moment ago, he said, wow, where do you keep getting all these great guests? Everybody I've had on so far has been an American Warrior Society member. And then there was a gentleman that made a comment a little while ago, says warriors, ha, 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 ha. What does that mean? I'll tell you, it means nothing more than someone who is willing to protect their family, their friends, themselves, or their loved ones, right? So that's all it means from harm. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, I think the word warrior gets a bad rap, and I don't know how you feel about that, Andrew, but it does not necessarily mean what you think it means. It means someone who's involved in a struggle with an opposing force. It could be as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the terminology you young kids are using these days. I don't have a clue, man. I like to do jujitsu. I think it helps me in life and work. I like to shoot guns because it helps me in life and work, and it's just fun to go, shoot a USPSA match and get better. Um, I don't consider myself a warrior. I don't consider myself a guardian. I don't consider myself any real term, maybe libertarian. Probably be a lot more libertarian than any other political affiliation, if you want to call it that, but it's like, I think too much in society, we try to get into these camps, and it's like, look, man, like, if you go back and watch the show, you're going to hear me talk about problems in law enforcement. You're going to hear me talk about problems with, the public, the public perception, things they don't understand. There's problems on both sides. The main thing is, if I could leave anybody with any sort of word of wisdom or anything, is like, have the conversation and have the conversations, because that's how things change. Quit getting in, get past the headlines and get into the research. Like we talked on the LVNR, man, it's like the research will tell you this is fine. But if you believe the bullshit that the media is feeding you, then you're just going to be in the headlines. Do your own research, have the conversations. Let's make real change happen. Let's make cops better trained. Let's give them all the tools physically, not the little trinkets they give you on your belt to avoid actually using your hands. And let's get this done so that everybody can get along. Because once the police go away, it's the brown shirts, and you don't want to deal with the brown shirt. You want to deal with your local cop, the guy that lives down the street from you, the officer that lives in the neighborhood next to yours. You want to deal with that guy because he's one of you. You
Yep.
deal with the brown shirts, and we're going to have a huge problem. And so this war on police bullshit has to stop. These politicians are pandering, and they're merely wanting votes. They want more power. And the only way to get more power is to keep the citizens stirred up against each other. And because if everybody realized that, we were all kind of on the same side, and that we're tired of being controlled by this upper political class that's trying to, hold on to all the power they got, then they have a real problem. But if they can keep us stirred up with each other, then it's the old Kansas City shuffle, right? Look what's going on over here, so you don't see what I'm doing over here, kind of thing. And so, until people get past the headlines, like I said before, there's an educational problem, right? We only allow, look at universities. What message are they pushing? When you have, like, even UC Berkeley, right? It's a notorious super far left liberal university. They won't even allow Ben Shapiro to come speak. They won't even allow a conservative commentator to come in there and talk. That's a problem. Especially when you're getting into higher education, you should have all points considered and then make your choice from there. You should be able to sample all the points of view out there. Have a libertarian guy come in, talk to him. Have a conservative guy, have a liberal person, have a far left, have a far right, have all these people, even the crazy. And then listen to what they're all saying and decide what's right for you. Not just take this re-education and get it shoved in your ear. Man, that's communism. That's that's socialist. That's whatever term, that's what Stalin and Hitler did, and that's not America.
No, I agree with you,
Not
man.
America at all.
No, I think you're spot on. The way you beat bad ideas is with better ideas, right? Not by silencing dissent. I agree with you. Let's all come to the table. Let's hear what you have to say. Let's look at the facts. Not necessarily I'm interested in hearing about your feelings, but you also need to back that up with some data. And then we beat those bad ideas with better ideas. I'm not saying that I have the best ideas or you do. I'm willing to listen to what others say, but when you start rioting and looting and burning things to the ground, it kind of loses the luster of your message a little bit. But Andrew, thanks for.
Man, like
Go ahead.
the protesters have every right in the world guaranteed by the Constitution to protest and to get their message out. Whether I agree with the message doesn't even matter.
Yep.
They have a right to peacefully protest. You don't have a right to break other people's shit and to set cities on fire. You do not have that right. I don't care how mad you are. So, what we've seen in our city that has worked really well is the peaceful protesters distancing themselves from the rioting and looting stuff because they want their message heard. And so we deserve, or they deserve, to have their message heard. You want to riot and loot, you go to jail, period. And if you want to start riots, you need to be prosecuted federally for that crime if that's the most time you can get. We shouldn't allow people to burn our cities to the ground just because they're having a damn tantrum. But if you have a peaceful protest and you want to talk, we should be able to sit down and talk. Government officials and everybody sit down and have a roundtable conversation where everybody gets heard and we all come together and find either a compromise or we find the best way. Burning cities to the ground, man, ain't doing anything because if you're a peaceful protester, your message gets lost. It gets lost as soon as things start breaking. If you don't turn and say those people are not part of us, they're not part of our message. We don't care what you do to them. We just want our message heard.
Well, and some stats I saw recently was because you talk about, the peaceful protesters holding those that are breaking stuff within their organization or within their name to hold themselves accountable. I heard a stat the other day, Andrew, that said that most things that internal affairs look at with regard to cops breaking faith with the community, using excessive force, et cetera, were reported by other police officers. So I think that within the law enforcement community, the first and most important person that's holding themselves accountable are themselves, and then the community. And I think that's what the stats.
You gotta watch out for each other. You gotta watch out for each other, man. And I'll tell you a quick little war story back from when I was just a regular patrol guy out there running the roads. Is I backed up one officer who's no longer with our agency, and he had stopped the car, and I got there right as he stopped it, so I was there on the approach, the whole incident and everything, right? And just the way he talked to her, I didn't think was right. So we come back to the car, I was like, bro, I'm just gonna tell you, man, if I was that person in that car right now, you talk to me like that, I'd be ready to kick your ass. I don't know if that changed the way he did business after that or not, but I flat out told him, like, look, dude, you shouldn't talk to people that way. Like, there's no reason, unless they start ramping things up, you should be, officer friendly, dude. There's no reason to do that. And I don't know, but that's police officers need to watch out for each other, especially like we talked about before, if you go on a call and it's a rough one, dead kids, bodies mangled from car wrecks and things like that, and your partner is not in a good spot to go on that next call, don't let them go. You take it. Get another partner. We kind of work in squads, man. Let that officer take a break for 30 minutes, an hour. Let them get their head clear before they go do that, because we have to watch out for each other, man, because when one officer has a bad incident, even if it's just something like talking rudely to someone, it makes us all look bad, and it is their fault, but sometimes other things exacerbate it, and you need to be able to see that in your people, saying, hey man, go take a break, go over here, loosen up, get some deep breaths, get your mind right, and then we'll get back to it. So that helps society also, and society needs to understand too that there are things that go on in every community that police officers are kind of a curtain for. You see one side of a curtain, but you don't see the other. And we don't want situations like Atlanta to happen, to where blue flu type incidents happen, because it's not good for anybody, really. It might get something done eventually. It might get those officers' working conditions improved, but at the same time, it's not a good option. It's the best worst option kind of thing, right? So we don't want that to happen either, but we do want a little bit of understanding and not just buying all the bullshit the media is trying to feed everybody, because that's all it is, man. The media is into the mind control and the political game, and you don't think they'll absolutely lie to you to get you stirred up, you're crazy. I've been on scenes where the media writes the story the next day, and this is even local media, right? They write the story the next day, and you're like, what? You're like, were you even there? Like, this doesn't even make any sense. It's like I've always said they get two facts and then they make up a story around it. It's like, yes, that was the guy's name. Yes, there was a car crash. No, none of the other stuff happened. It's like, it's a work of fiction.
Yeah, I remember being a Marine deployed, and my mom kept saying, "Hey, I'm reading on the news that the Marines are out at sea," and I'm like, "No, I'm on the ground." So, and then my mom says, "No, I understand. You're probably just saying that because for operational security or something." But I'm gonna tell you right now, the CNN is reporting that the Marines are not there; they're out at sea. So I picked up a handful of sand, I stuck it in the envelope, and mailed it to her. And I said, "I don't know of another way to show you. I'm in the sand. I'm not on the ship." And it's like, again, I've seen the media lie internationally with regard to news. I've seen them lie locally. I don't know why it's advantageous to them to misreport the facts, but I see that more often than not, and it seems to be getting worse.
Oh, absolutely, man. Like, our media in America now is pretty much tabloid. It's all tabloid. It used to be the tabloids were so outrageous that you knew it was a tabloid. Now it's like the normal mainstream media saw it. Like, I don't really watch Fox News or CNN or MSNBC. I don't watch any of them because they have an agenda. Their agenda is to get you to believe the way they want to believe. And luckily, for what it's worth, the internet is kind of a bittersweet thing, but you can research. I shouldn't research an article like I don't know, George Floyd's case or Rashard Brooks' case. I shouldn't look at two articles that say completely different things about the same incident when there are facts out there, right? Every I mean, you read these things and they're all spun to whatever political win that particular media outlet subscribes to, and it's all bullshit. They're just trying to manipulate people's minds and keep everything in America stirred up, man. The bottom line is that this is America. People are coming to our country to escape poor conditions in their country. You don't do that if the country you're trying to escape to is shitty, right? So it's like, you'll hear all these people talking about all the bad stuff America has done, and we can have another show about history. And it's like, yes, America has not been rainbows and sunshine forever, but on the planet Earth, America is probably the best nation with the best living conditions around. People are fleeing their country that sucks to come here. They wouldn't do that if it was as bad as the media told.
Yeah, I agree with you. I remember President Trump got in some hot water because he said something about some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I won't go into it, but one of the points that I made is, one of the countries is Burundi, that he was talking about. And I'm like, have you hired a Burundian? Because I've hired two Burundians. I've worked with a 501c3 company called, well, I won't say the name on here. They may not want to be affiliated, but where we hire people that are just immigrating to this country, give them a job and help them. So it's a partner force with people that are coming over. So anyway, and I love that. But when you talk to these people, the conditions that they fled is unimaginable. They didn't flee a paradise, man. They fled a nightmarish hellhole in a lot of cases.
Yeah, man. I tell people all the time, come to America. Our poor people are obese.
Yeah.
I mean, where else in history, poor people are usually skinny? Not in America, buddy. Our poor, our impoverished are still, at healthy body weight or more.
Yeah.
Where you go to these other countries like that, man, and these people are starving to death. They don't have internet. They don't have cars. They don't have, jobs. A friend of mine actually hiked Mount Kilimanjaro a couple years ago. He said, man, like, you got the guys over there. I don't know if they're called Sherpas on Kilimanjaro or not, but that's basically what their job was. They carry your stuff for you because the high elevation, people come over there. They're not in they're not used to that. Those guys are, man. Those guys are carrying stuff on their heads. He said they're flying up down the mountains, and he tipped them at the end of the day, man. And he said a couple times throughout the week he had given them like a candy bar, and those guys like cherished it. They were like, I'm going to take this home to my family. And then at the end of the week, he tips them like $100. He said, I thought the guy was going to cry. He said, I thought he was going to cry. I gave him $100. This guy had carried my stuff for a week up and down this mountain, was real happy. He said he was a super nice guy. So I gave him $100. It's on his vacation. Gave him $100. He said, I thought the guy was going to cry. And it's like, people don't understand that, man. Like, come to America and, your worst thing is like, oh, damn, my Wi-Fi went out. This sucks. I'm going to call the cable company. And this guy's over here. You give him a candy bar. And the guy says, I'm going to cherish this enough to take it home and share it with my family because it's probably the only candy bar they ever eat. You want to talk about how bad America is? That America sucks? Come on, dude. Go live in that guy's life. Hike stuff up and down Kilimanjaro, and you hadn't seen a Snickers bar but maybe twice in your life when somebody brought it over there and somebody gives you one.
I will say, I think that's one of the benefits of having served our country like you and I did in the Marine Corps and having deployed around the world and seen other places. I've been to Africa, I've been to Asia, I've been to Europe, and I've been all over North America, and there's no better standard of living. And like you said, Andrew, I think you're right. I think we can close with this, and that is, are we perfect? No, we're far from perfect, but I think our ideals are what makes us American, and we're always striving to be better, the better version of ourselves. We've stumbled along the way, but our founding documents set forth a perfect America that we all wish and hope to have someday. Parting comments, Andrew.
Oh man, just to your point, man, it's like have those conversations. Those conversations what make us better. When you shoot or do jiu-jitsu, if you're a competitive shooter, you look at your videos, your buddies are out there shooting with you and they say, hey man, you could have done this a little bit better. You could have done that a little bit better. The same methodology applies to America, right? We realized years ago, slavery, no good, did away with it. Then we had, awful things like the Jim Crow laws and segregation. And Americans got together, had those conversations, said, man, you're right. This is terrible. We should not be doing this to people. Did away with it. And so now we just have to keep doing that. We have to keep having those conversations. If the Black community thinks there is a problem with law enforcement, whether it's, whether there's any kind of basis to it or not, I'm not saying there is or isn't. I'm just saying the conversation needs to be had because at minimum, there's a perception problem. And if there's a perception problem, we need to have that conversation. And we need to explain things and do it that way so that we can all be in a better America. People shouldn't feel that way. I do have some empathy that if they I think empathy is the right word. I don't know. I'm starting to use big words again in uncharted waters, right? But if they think there's a problem, I wouldn't want to feel that way, whether it's factually supported or not. And like I said, I don't know if it is or isn't, but I wouldn't want to feel that way. And if I feel that way, maybe somebody can explain it to me to where I feel better about it or where we can move past that and have those conversations and improve those relations so that things work out for all and so that everybody in America gets the opportunity and gets the freedom. And never forget that America only guarantees you an opportunity. It guarantees guarantees you the pursuit of happiness. It doesn't say anything about you catching. That's on you. But everybody in America should have the opportunity to succeed, and they do it that way. Will. But America's still the greatest nation on the earth, man. And until you've been to one of these third world countries, you don't really appreciate it. I went once, and like I've told my wife before, I left America one time, and I didn't forget anything when I was over there, and I'm not leaving again. I'm not a world traveler like Mr. Rich Brown. If it's not in America, I don't need it.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for being on, man. I really appreciate it, brother. And thank you to the folks that joined us today. Check out GunJitsu Podcast, and maybe we'll get your partner in crime, Cody Hudson, my jiu-jitsu professor, on here very soon to speak as well. He has a lot of experiences I'd love to tap into, and I'm sure our listeners would as well. Andrew, thanks for being on the show today. And remember, folks, the fight is coming. Be ready.
Be ready.